at this point, I'll just respond to this question. What good reasons are there to think that God does not exist? Now, in tonight's debate, I'm going to defend two basic contentions. First, there are good reasons to think that God exists, and two, there are no good reasons to think that atheism is true. Now, I'll leave it up to Steve to present his arguments for atheism before I respond to them. But in my opening speech, I want to sketch some lines of evidence in favor of God's existence. As an ex-atheist myself, now Christian, I know that God makes sense of a wide range of the data of human experience, including philosophical, scientific, moral, and historical considerations. Let's start with the origin of the universe. Have you guys ever asked yourself where the universe came from? Did it have a beginning, or does it just go back and back forever? Typically, atheists have said that the universe is just eternal and uncaused, but there are good reasons, both philosophically and scientific, which call into question that assumption. Philosophically, the idea of the infinite past is very problematic. If the universe never had a beginning, that means that the number of past events in the history of the universe is infinite. But the real existence of an actually infinite number of things leads to metaphysical absurdities. For example, here's an example of the absurdity of an infinite past. Take the planets Jupiter and Saturn. Suppose that for every orbit that Saturn completes around the sun, the planet Jupiter completes 2. If Saturn has completed 10 orbits, Jupiter has completed 20. If Saturn has completed 1 trillion, Jupiter has completed 2 trillion. The longer they orbit, the farther Saturn falls behind. If they continue to orbit forever, they will approach a limit at which Saturn is infinitely far behind Jupiter. But now turn the story around. Suppose Jupiter and Saturn have been orbiting the sun from eternity past. Now which one will have completed the most orbits? Well, the correct mathematical answer is that the number of their orbits is identical, but that seems absurd. For the longer they orbit, the greater the disparity between them grows. So how does the number of their orbits magically become identical simply by making them orbit from eternity past? These and many other examples suggest that infinity is just an idea in your mind, not something that exists in reality. But that entails that since past events are not just ideas but are real, the number of past events must be finite. Therefore, the series of past events cannot go back and back forever. Rather, the universe must have begun to exist. But then the inevitable question arises, why did the universe come into being? What brought the universe into existence? Some intrepid atheists have asserted that the universe just popped into being without a cause, but surely that's metaphysically impossible. For such a conclusion is, in the words of philosopher of science Bernulf Schneider, quote, in head-on collision with the most successful ontological commitment in the history of science, namely the metaphysical principle that out of nothing, nothing comes. So why does the universe exist instead of just nothing? Where did it come from? There must have been a transcendent cause which brought the universe into being. We can summarize our argument thus far as follows. 1, the universe began to exist. 2, if the universe began to exist, then the universe has a transcendent cause. And 3, therefore the universe has a transcendent cause. Given the truth of the two premises, the conclusion necessarily follows. Now, from the very nature of the case, this cause must be an uncaused, changeless, timeless, and immaterial being which created the universe. It must be uncaused because we've seen that there cannot be an infinite regress of causes. It must be timeless and therefore changeless, at least without the universe, because it created time. Because it also created space, it must transcend space as well and therefore be immaterial, not physical. Now, there are only 2 possible candidates that could fit such a description, either an abstract object like a number or an unembodied mind or consciousness. But abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. For example, the number 7 can't cause anything. Therefore, it follows that the transcendent cause of the universe is an unembodied mind. And thus we are brought not merely to an uncaused cause of the universe, but to its personal creator. Let's go to objective moral values and duties. Our first argument gives us a transcendent personal creator of the universe, but it doesn't tell us anything about his moral character. So how can we know that he is good? My second argument addresses that question. If God did not exist, objective moral values and duties would not exist. And by objective moral values, I mean values which are valid and binding whether people believe in them or not. Many theists and atheists agree that if God does not exist, then moral values and duties are not objective in this sense. For example, Michael Ruse, he's an agnostic philosopher of science. He says that morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory. The problem, though, is on a naturalistic atheist view, moral values are just the byproduct of biological evolution and social conditioning. Just like a troop of baboons exhibits cooperative, even self-sacrificial behavior because natural selection has determined it to be advantageous in the struggle for survival, so their primate cousins, atheists will say, have developed similar behavior for this same reason. As a result of socio-biological pressures, atheists will say there has emerged among Homo sapiens a sort of herd, H-E-R-D, herd morality, which functions well in the perpetuation of our species. The problem on atheism, though, is on the atheistic view, there doesn't seem to be anything about this morality that makes it objectively binding and true. Certain actions, such as rape, atheists will tell us they may not be socially advantageous, and so in the course of human development, it has become taboo. But that does absolutely nothing to show that rape is wrong. Such behavior goes on all the time in the animal kingdom, and given atheism, the rapist who chooses to flout the herd morality is doing nothing more serious than acting unfashionably, sort of the moral equivalent of a man that chooses to wear white socks with the tuxedo. He's simply out of step with the herd. But that leads to our second premise. 2, objective moral values and duties do exist, and in moral experience we apprehend a realm of moral values and duties that impose themselves upon us. As philosopher Louise Anthony, and she's an atheist, she admits that objective moral values exist. She said, any argument for moral skepticism is going to depend upon premises which are less obvious than the reality of objective moral values themselves. Now, I was gratified to see that Steve, the guy I'm debating, he agrees with me with objective moral values. He affirms the existence of objective moral values. On his video on the moral argument, he says, and I quote you, Steve, people know murder is wrong. Steve also says in that video, it's really, really wrong. Steve's right. Objective moral values exist. Actions like rape, cruelty, racial hatred, and child abuse aren't just socially unacceptable behavior. They're truly evil. Michael Roos also agrees. He says the man who says it's morally acceptable to rape is just as mistaken is the man who says 2 + 2 = 5, Lawrence Krauss. Some things at least are truly evil. But if that is the case, then it follows logically and inescapably that therefore God exists. Now, some people think that evil in the world provides overwhelming evidence against the existence of God. I think the exact opposite is true. Real evil in the world serves to prove the existence of God, since without God to ground objective moral values, good and evil as such would not exist. Let's talk about Jesus Christ. The historical facts concerning Jesus. Our case so far gives us a generic monotheism affirmed by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. But do we know anything more about who this God is? Well, to answer that question, we have to look at the person of Jesus of Nazareth. The historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, was by all accounts a remarkable individual. And historians have reached something of a consensus that Jesus did come onto the scene with an unprecedented sense of divine authority. He had the authority to stand and speak in God's place. He claimed that in himself the kingdom of God had arrived, and as visible demonstrations of this fact, he carried out a ministry of miracle working and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. Now, most people may think that the resurrection of Jesus is something you just believe in by faith or not. But I'm going to go through 3 facts that are actually recognized by the majority of New Testament historians today, which I believe are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Fact 1, on separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. Fact 2, on the Sunday after his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers. And fact 3, the original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having every predisposition to the contrary. This is why N.T. Wright, who's an eminent New Testament scholar, concludes, quote, that is why as a historian I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. So the Christian has rational reasons to believe this, and also attempts to explain away these 3 great facts like, well, the disciples stole the body, or Jesus wasn't really dead. Guys, they've all been universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. The simple fact is there's just no plausible naturalistic explanation of these facts, and therefore it seems to me the Christian is justified in believing that the best explanation of the evidence is that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. But that also entails that the God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth exist. And thus we have a good inductive argument for the existence of God based on the resurrection of Jesus. Christians also experience God within their lives. Unless Steve can provide a defeater which shows that Christians are just deluded, we are rational and honest to believe in our experience. This is experiential reality. Let's go to the fine-tuning, the teleological argument. God makes sense of the complex order in the universe, and during the last 30 years, scientists have been, what's the word I'm looking for, shocked to discover that the existence of intelligent life depends upon a delicate and complex balance of initial conditions simply given at the creation of the universe. And we now know that life-prohibiting universes are vastly more probable than any life-permitting universe like ours. How much more probable? Well, the answer, guys, is that the chances that the universe should be life-permitting are so infinitesimal as to be incomprehensible and incalculable. This is going to blow your minds, guys. Check this out. This is why atheism is now on the decline worldwide, why Christianity is still growing. PCW Davies has calculated